Hi, boys and girls. Happy Thursday. I am here today to read chapter 4 of Flat Stanley to you. I am hoping that some of you have gotten your Flat Stanleys or your Flat Farthings, and if you haven't yet, I hope that you get them today in the mail. I cannot wait to see the adventures. Also, remember, it is show and tell week, and we've only had two show and tells, one show and myself and Kate and S's show and tell so far. So find something in your house to do a show and tell with. I would love to see it. All right. And I'm sure your friends would too. Chapter 4, The Museum Thieves. Remember, chapter 3 was Stanley the kite, and he flew a kite, or he turned himself into a kite, but then Arthur forgot about him and he got stuck in the tree. So we'll see what happens this chapter. Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart lived in the apartment above the lamb chops. Mr. Dart was an important man. He was the director of the famous Museum of Art downtown in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed that the elevator that Mr. Dart, who was originally a cheerful man, had become quite gloomy. Oh, he had noticed in the elevator that Mr. Dart had become quite gloomy, but he had no idea what the reason why was. And then at breakfast one morning, he heard Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop talking about Mr. Dart. I see, said Mr. Lambchop, reading the paper over his coffee cup. That's still another painting has been stolen from the famous museum. It says here that Mr. O.J. Dart, the director, is at his wits' end. Oh, dear. Are the police no help? Mrs. Lambchop asked. It seems not, said Mr. Lambchop. Listen to what the chief of police told the newspaper. We suspect a gang of sneak thieves. These are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. However, my men and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope people will buy tickets for the policemen's ball and not park their cars where signs say don't. So that's what the police said. But here's Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop reading the newspaper about the painting that was stolen. It's a little bit fuzzy. I don't know why. Let's see if I can focus this. I'm sorry that it's fuzzy, but I'm not sure how to do that. Whenever I use the attached camera, there's a place to focus it, but I'm not seeing that on this one. Sorry, guys. The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the elevator. These sneak thieves work at night, Mr. Dart said. It's very hard for our guards to stay awake when they have been on duty all day. And the famous museum is so big, we cannot guard every picture at the same time. I fear it is hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had lit up in the air above his head, giving out little shooting lines of excitement, Stanley Lambchop had an idea. He told it to Mr. Dart. Stanley, Mr. Dart said, if your mother will give you permission, I will put you and your plan to work this very night. Mrs. Lambchop gave her son permission. But you'll have to take a long nap this afternoon, she said. I won't have you up all night long unless you take a nap. That evening, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall, where the biggest and most important paintings were hung. He pointed to a huge painting that showed a bearded man wearing a floppy velvet hat and playing a violin for a lady who laid on the couch. There was a half-man, half-horse person standing behind them, and 3 fat children with wings were flying around above. Mr. Dart explained that this was the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about that later on. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, It's time for you to put on your disguise. I already thought of that, Stanley said. And I brought one. My cowboy suit. It has a red bandana that I can tie over my face. No one will recognize me in a million years. I really wish that you could see these pictures. I don't know why it's looking like this. Let's see. Turn the camera away from the light. No, you can't see that either. Here is a picture of the painting, and Mr. Dart is pointing to it. And here you can see the guy playing the violin, and it says he has on a floppy hat, and he's playing it next to to a lady that's laying on the couch. And it says that behind him there's a half man, half horse, and that there's children. There's one, two, I can't find the other one. 3 children flying around behind them. So Mr. Dart is showing Stanley. I can't point to it backwards. So Stanley just told Mr. Dart that he brought his cowboy suit with a red bandana. No, Mr. Dart said. You will have to wear the disguise that I've chosen. From a closet, he took a white dress with a blue sash and a tiny pair of pointed little shoes, a wide straw hat with a blue band that matched the sash, and a wig and a stick. The wig was made of blonde hair, long and done in ringlets. The stick was curved at the top, and it too had a blue ribbon on it. It's a shepherdess in disguise, Mr. Dart said. You will look like a painting that belongs in the main hall with the empty frame. We do not have cowboy paintings in the main hall. Stanley was so disgusted he could hardly speak. I will look like a girl. That's what I will look like, he said. I wish I never had this idea. So there's Mr. Dart holding that dress. Stanley's not happy. But Stanley was a good sport, so we put on the disguise. Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb up into the empty picture frame. Stanley was able to stay in place because Mr. Dart had cleverly put 4 small spikes in the wall, one for each hand and foot. The frame was a perfect fit. Against the wall, Stanley looked just like a picture. Except for one thing, Mr. Dart said. Shepherdesses are supposed to look happy. They smile at their sheep and at the sky. You look fierce and mad. Not happy, Stanley. Stanley tried hard to get a faraway look in his eyes and to smile a bit. There he is, hanging in the picture. Mr. Dart stood back for a few feet and stared at him for a moment. Well, he said, it may not be art, but I know what I like. He went off to make sure that certain other parts of Stanley's plan were taken care of, and Stanley was left alone. It was very dark in the main hall. A little bit of moonlight came through the windows, and Stanley could just make out the world's most expensive painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the bearded man with the violin and the lady on the couch and the half-horse person and the winged children were all waiting, as he was, for something to happen. Time passed and he got tireder and tireder. Anyone would be tired at this late at night, especially if he had to stand in a picture frame balancing on little spikes. Maybe they won't come, Stanley thought. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come at all. The moon went behind a cloud and the main hall was pitch dark. It seemed to get quieter too, with all the darkness. There was absolutely no sound at all. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle beneath the golden curls of the wig. Creak. The creaking sound came from right out in the middle of the main hall, and even as he heard it, Stanley saw in the same place a tiny glow of light. The creaking came bigger, and the glow got bigger. A trap door had opened in the floor, and 2 men came out up into the hall. Stanley understood everything at once. These must be the sneak thieves. They had a secret trap entrance into the museum from the outside. That's why they had never been caught. And now tonight they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the world. There they are, coming in through the floor. He held very still in his picture frame and listened to the sneak thieves. This is it, Max, said the first one. This is where we art robbers pull a sensational job while the rest of the people sleep. Right, Luther, said the other man, and in all this great city there's no one to expect us. Ha ha, thought Stanley Lambchop. That's what you think. The sneak thieves put down their lantern and took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. What would we do to anyone who tried to capture us, Max? The first man asked. We would kill him. What else? Arthur replied. Or not Arthur. Luther. The part of my paper was scratched off. I couldn't see the first name, but I knew his name wasn't Arthur. We would kill him. What else? Luther replied. That was enough to frighten Stanley, and he was even more frightened when Luther came over and stared at him. This sheep girl, Luther said. I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max. This one looks scared. Just in time, Stanley managed to get a faraway look in his eyes again, and to smile, sort of. You're crazy, Luther, Max says. She is smiling. And what a little pretty thing she is. That made Stanley furious. He was not a girl. He waited until the sneak thieves had turned back to the world's most expensive painting, and he shouted in his loudest, most terrifying voice, Police! Police! Mr. Dart! The sneak thieves are here! The sneak thieves looked at each other. Max, said the first one very quietly, I think I heard the sheep girl yell. I think I did too, Max said in a quivery voice. Oh boy, yelling pictures. We both need a rest. What's going on? So they think they're just dreaming that they heard the picture talking. Everyone knows that a picture can't talk. But this one can. You'll get a rest, all right, shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with the chief of police and lots of guards and policemen behind them. You'll get arrested, that's what. Ha, ha, ha. The sneak thieves were too mixed up by Mr. Dart's joke and too frightened by the policemen to put up a fight. Before they knew it, they had been handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning, in the office of the chief of police, Stanley Lambchop got a medal. The day after that, his picture was in all of the newspapers. So there's Stanley with the police chief, and he got a medal that he's wearing around his neck. All those photographers and reporters are there taking pictures of him to put in the newspaper. That is the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 is called Arthur's Good Idea. And I believe, yes, chapter 5 is our last chapter. So we will finish our last chapter on Friday, which is perfect. 5 days, 5 chapters. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you get your flat farthings in the mail soon. Don't forget your show and tell video as well. Bye-bye, boys and girls. I miss you.